and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In the case of this month's guest, Charlene Elsby, she was recommended to me by Mike Klein. If you like the episodes I have done with him, you'll like this one, and if you like this one, go back and listen to those. I think you'll like them as well. Charlene Elsby has written Hexus, Psychros, Affect, and Musos. Her essays have appeared in Heavy Feather Review, Bustle Books, and the LA Review of Books Philosophical Salon. She's on Twitter at Elsby Charlene. We also talk about her forthcoming book, Bedlam, from Apocalypse Party Press, and Letters to Jenny, which is part of the Talented Perverts series from Filthy Loot Press, and so much more. Before we get into the conversation, let's ask you for some money. If you would like early episodes, patreon.com/noisemakerjoe is a good place to go for that. For a small recurring donation of $2 a month, I'll give you these episodes a couple days before everybody else gets them. You can also toss a one-time donation over to me at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe, or you can buy my book. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon. You can leave a review on Goodreads. You can also leave a review of this show on places like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you give it 5 stars, it'll be easier for people who don't already know me to find the show. You can also tweet about the show, and that's free too. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Charlene Elsby. Let's start with your philosophy work, because reading your fiction, I feel like a lot of it is informed by that, or at least kind of follows certain thought processes. So let's start with that.
Yeah. So what are we going for? Like broad strokes history?
Yeah, let's start there, and then I'll dig in where I feel like we should dig in.
All right. So I have a pretty extensive background in philosophy. I came into it as a wee undergraduate. I was a physics major at the University of Guelph, and then realized that if I wanted to talk about the deep and upsetting problems of the universe, philosophy was going to be more my thing, and I switched. And then I got all the degrees that I could. I got a contract and then a tenure-track position teaching. I was an assistant professor at a Purdue satellite campus down in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I was there for about 6 years. It actually relates to how I started writing again, because after they closed the philosophy department at my institution, they let us choose where else we would like to work. So we spread the professors out over campus. Some went to math and history, and I went to the English department. And I'm like, okay, I'm in the English department, I'd better write a novel. Which is something I had always used to do and then had given up on a decade and a half earlier. But that was like the stimulus for, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to be serious about it. And then I wrote Hexus.
Okay.
So yeah, I studied ancient philosophy for the most part, Aristotelian logic and metaphysics. I talk about truth, logic, things that don't exist, and contemporary phenomenology.
Okay. So that's fascinating that they kind of just like, one, that they would close the philosophy department. That feels very icky to me. But then it's also interesting that they let you guys just kind of move around. That's fascinating.
I honestly don't think they cared. It's just like, find your own place to live.
I guess that's better than just saying, sorry, go find a new job entirely.
Oh, yeah. They waited 3 years to do that. Yeah. So I'm out of it now.
Yeah. Because you work for the Canadian government now? Is that what I saw?
That's right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do for that? Or can you not say? Is it top secret?
It's not that secret. I analyze data, mostly representation, self-ID data, for grants for universities. So some of the grants we give to universities have equity targets involved, where they have to fulfill the requirements of maintaining representation of equity-seeking groups.
Mm.
The people who are granted funds, and I'm the one who runs the numbers to make sure that they're doing that.
Oh, okay. That's cool. So the interesting thing too, in addition to that, is kind of what you studied. It feels like it's not the type of philosophy I see the writers on my Twitter timeline talking about. Yeah, it feels like there's a lot more like Neoplatonist, Francophile type of stuff going on.
Yep.
And I guess because I'm not familiar with the Aristotelian direction that it goes, like I can kind of discern from having like read the descriptions of your philosophy books on Goodreads and reading your fiction that it's definitely a more I guess, is it analytical as opposed to continental?
I do continental.
Okay.
I am a continental at heart. And the way I got to Aristotle was actually through the almost contemporary French and German, the continental philosophers,
Okay.
the phenomenologists. So what I did in graduate school was to actually trace one of these concepts that is used in phenomenology all the way through back to Aristotle and just demonstrate its development over the past 2,000 years to how it appears in the contemporary literatures. So I'm huge into phenomenology, and I know we talk to the same people on Twitter, so you probably know about Merleau-Ponty.
I actually don't know if I've heard that name before.
Okay, big French guy. Absolutely important. And then there's, of course, the Deleuzians.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I do a bit of that.
Okay.
It's in the milieu. I wrote an essay about Logan Berry to determine whether he was more of a phenomenologist or a Deleuzian, based on the Run Off Sugar Crystal Lake book.
Okay.
And that was a lot. Mm-hmm.
And what did you find?
I determined that I promise I remember. I think I declared he was a phenomenologist.
Okay.
I mean, as soon as I'm done writing something, I forget what I said, but I'm pretty sure. And I would have concluded that just because I think he's a good person.
Mm.
And all the good people are phenomenologists at heart.
Interesting. Fascinating. Where should I start with phenomenology then? Because after this, I'm gonna have to go fill in all my blind spots that I've identified here.
Yeah, go read the Merleau-Ponty. Phenomenology of perception is fantastic, but if you're into the really creepy metaphysical shit, it's the visible and the invisible. And that's the one that describes, our perceptual reality in contradistinction to the transcendental basis of that reality, the underpinnings of our reality that somehow lurk beneath and control what it is we actually perceive.
Mm. Okay. I will. I feel so...
Is that too much?
No, it's not. No, I feel overwhelmed with the whole phenomenology thing, just because I haven't really looked like into it from that direction before.
I was impressed when you knew the difference between analytic and continental. Tell me about that.
I don't even know if I have a good definition I feel like comfortable with. The idea in my head is like analytic is very like logic driven and doing proofs and kind of almost more like math, whereas continental is all this sort of goopy body without organs, let's try to make new terms and redefine everything and that sort of thing.
I see.
But
your use of the term goopy makes me think that it's not necessarily an always positive impression.
I mean, No, I don't think I necessarily have a sort of negative idea toward it. There's some stuff. I'm kind of like turned off by a lot of the Jungian stuff. And I think part of that is because of my interest in like the study of Western esotericism and how muddy Jung's alchemy stuff has made studying that, because there's so many people who think that alchemy is like a philosophical thing, or like has always been a philosophical thing when it's just a proto-chemistry. So it, like, there's some of that stuff that just kind of frustrates me because it's stuff that's like in the way, but I'm also aware of the lack of knowledge I have. So it's like, as I'm sifting through things, I'm pretty sure it's not useful, but I have to sift through it anyway because I don't know enough to know that it's not useful. And I don't know. I think the more I dig into like some postmodern type stuff, I get like frustrated by all the diagrams and wordplay that goes on.
Yeah, me too. That I'm so excited for you to read phenomenology then. Like Merleau-Ponty, Husserlian phenomenology, the kind of stuff I do it's supposed to be a rigorous analytic approach to reality. And then it was sometime after that, I personally blame Heidegger. That's when it got goopy. That's when he started like misreading Greek words and then claiming that had significance, right? But the kind of stuff that I do is just like we take our concrete reality and subject it to rigorous analysis until we can discern the essence of the phenomena that appear to us. And we develop systematically a metaphysics based upon that.
Okay. That does feel like what my brain wants to do right now at this stage in my life. Especially as I sort of study the, like Gnosticism and various mystic traditions, particularly like within Western esotericism. Like, I love those diagrams you get out of like Nag Hammadi adjacent texts where it's like, here's all of these like squares and diagrams, and like, yeah, you can definitely like get to heaven. Like, there's just a recipe of brain things you need to do first. That's really enticing to me.
Yeah, the Nag Hammadi is something my first philosophy professor told me to read, and he became my philosophical mentor for the next however many years, and we still hang out. But yeah, it's that kind of mysticism actually comes out of the calculating, rigorous analysis that we do, as opposed to, it's not divined from. I'm not going to say that nothing is inspired or, divinely given, but these things are discerned through some kind of process that takes effort that you can do on purpose. That's how I ended up in philosophy in the first place, is because this is something I was, wanted to do naturally, except you need a method for it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Some kind of learned method that seems to work.
Yeah. I wonder if this is at all associated to where I found a block when I was into science, like in high school, taking AP physics, because there was a brief moment there where I was like, I think being like an astrophysicist would be good. And we were talking about light, and just like the fact that the primary colors of light and the primary colors of pigment are different, and that when you mix them together they make different things. And it's like, okay, but why? Right? Like, all of I had such a hard time just sort of accepting that something was a thing and wanting to know why, beyond what I had any sort of like factual, knowledgeable basis for, right? Like, I was asking quantum questions in a high school advanced physics class that was doing only algebraic physics. It was
exactly.
I kept
and if
getting
you
ahead
look
of myself.
No, not at all. If you look at the actual like Yes, I was reading those textbooks, and if you read the entire physical description, and then I encountered the same phenomenon where at the bottom of the page there's a footnote and it says, well, we say this, but actually color is a psychophysical phenomenon.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, well then why aren't we studying the psychophysical phenomenon if we're only able to account for, light bends in water to this degree? But yeah, how am I seeing it differently than that? And why? And okay, how do the forms of perception color everything we are taking in? And if we understand that the forms of perception are filtering reality for us, then we really should be studying consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we're going quantum here again.
Right.
We need a physical system that doesn't just assume that observation is reliable, which is the basis of empirical physics. But as soon as like the definition of empiricism is observable. Observable how? By the senses, and then, well, what's beyond the senses? The things that, organize the senses for us to make the perceptual data comprehensible. These are the things I wanted to know about. And they wanted me to make spreadsheets all day. Kind of ironic. That's what I do again, but
yeah,
just to make money.
I suppose so. And also, I just can't do that math, right? Like there's some point where it's just like, I got to either move away from this, or I'm gonna have to get a lot better at math to do some of that. I can't do that math.
Is cool. Mm-hmm.
I think there's got to be a way in my adult life to autodidact myself into understanding sort of higher level math without having to do equations, but I'm not sure what that is. Every time I see Jackie S on Twitter talk about her experience doing math stuff in academia, like tickles some part of me that's like, oh, but how do I get there without going to college or struggling with calculus equations? And maybe that's just what you need to do. Who knows?
Sounds hard. Maybe we could just YouTube it. I don't know.
Maybe. I sure hope so. Somebody, people are doing stuff on YouTube to make it so that I can pretend to understand Gnosticism. Somebody can make YouTube videos to make me pretend to understand higher level calculus.
I think so.
Okay, so because I most recently finished Psychros, I want to talk about Psychros, even though that's not maybe in terms of the market what people are excited about right now. But I'm very fascinated by that book. So it's a book about a woman whose partner commits suicide. And then she decides to have sex with some people and then start killing some people. And her thought process throughout the whole thing was interesting in how challenging it was. I've been doing this thing recently where I've been pushing back on, how do I say this in a way that makes sense? I had similar issues or challenges, I don't know, uncomfortable feelings reading the book for when Sarah Gerard came on the show, True Love. Being that there were books about women who had been treated poorly and were reacting in ways that I couldn't necessarily condone. But being a man, I wanted to not necessarily be no, that's bad, figure out a different way to deal with it, and instead try to understand, up until she started murdering people. Then I was like, oh, okay, well, that lets me off the hook a little bit. But I feel like Psychros is one of those books, kind of like Catcher in the Rye, where you can tell a lot about a person by how they react to it. And So I'm interested to hear you talk about that book so I can maybe start to understand my reactions to the book.
Talk about the book. Well, you made a couple of comments just there. We should probably work through those. Okay.
Yeah.
She's not necessarily meant to be a sympathetic character.
Mm-hmm.
It's it does a lot to unfilter, I think, the way people are expected to deal with things as they happen. There's definitely a sense in which she's being purely reactive. So while she is making decisions, performing actions, and sometimes those actions have great consequences, it's all in relation to him,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's all about him, and he's not even there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Could we call it a study of reactivity? I don't know. That's a concept that just occurred to me based on your description. But maybe. More so, it's just, I took the concept, I took the character, and I followed her from one moment to the next until she met her natural end. And that was the book for me.
Yeah.
It's a process where, much like the physical universe, you take a set of initial conditions that exist, and certain laws of behavior and form, or, gravity, consciousness, whatever. And you just, once everything is set in its place, see how it plays out. So yeah, I think her trajectory was set at the beginning in events that happened before the book started.
Right.
And she just kind of follows through.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that. That sort of, it kind of reminded me as I was reading it, and I think more so now that you've explained it like that, to Gone Girl, particularly the movie. I haven't read the book. Where she is just sort of like doing these things and justifying them, and like the big kind of monologue that she has at the end of the movie where she's like, I was always changing myself, who I was, to be the girl that the boys wanted, and look how my life turned out, sort of thing. It's like, well, we didn't see any of that in the movie. We started out with you as an adult, not you as a girl in high school or college or wherever. And so I think there were some memes around the time the movie came out saying that movie was like a good for her movie. And because the book reminded me of that movie, I was like, okay, so there's going to be an element of people who are looking at the character in Psychros and being like, yes, good. Like you're sticking it to the man. No pun intended, maybe. And getting your revenge or whatever. And also because I had read it after, I guess maybe the sequencing doesn't matter, but certain stories in Bedlam, like Split Dick David does a dick pic on a Tuesday. Obviously there's gender politics that were like in my mind as I was reading it, that I feel like I see a theme kind of like when I spend too much time scrolling through reels on Instagram, because my algorithm is such that because I'm a dad and I'm a work from home dad, that it knows I'm a parent, and it knows I'm scrolling through Instagram in the middle of the day. So it's like, okay, you're probably a stay-at-home mom. And so I see a lot of stay-at-home mom content about like invisible labor and mental load and stuff like that, that like hits me in a weird way because I'm the one at home. And within the realms of the left tube YouTube video essay spheres, there's talk lately about so-called men's issues. And so like all of this is germinating as I'm reading this book, and I feel like the character is just she's very familiar because of all that. And like I want to tell her that she's wrong, but I like don't have the resources to explain that. And also just from my position, that feels icky in the first place anyway, right? Like within the social issues, I try to keep a state of beginner mind, but because I've been, you know, reading the books and essays and watching the video essays for, you know, like 10 years now, like I feel like it's hard to maintain that, and be like ready to just kind of accept certain things. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. I think we can do some enlightening here. So let's see, what are we working with? So there's definitely some gender politics at work. But what interests me about how we're phrasing it is that it's being largely thought of in the abstract, right? These are things that we might consider as, you know, divorced from reality, that people have come to be aware of, that imply a certain set of behaviors that one must follow, including, you know, not questioning the woman, right? We shouldn't question the woman, except for the fact that she should very much be questioned, right?
Right.
She's killing people, Joe.
Yeah.
She's killing people. All right. So how would I differentiate between what's right and what's wrong about that book? She's a very sympathetic character, because there is a kind of oomph that people feel like they have felt that feeling before, but not necessarily reacted in the same way. There's a kind of catharsis where if you've been subject to a constant oppression through years and lifetimes, that if only I could just freak out and kill everyone, wouldn't that be nice? Seems like a very relatable emotion to have, but you don't do it. You don't do it because it's bad. So what has she done? She has, and this happens a lot, I think, to me. If you read the reviews for Hexus as well, it's a woman who kills a man over and over again. And people take that as a very metaphorical, let's talk about gender relations and power structures kind of book, when it's not. It's a very personal experience, like let's get down to the nitty gritty of how she is feeling and what she is doing and what are the exact thought process that lead her to enact certain behaviors that are in no way socially acceptable. And yet we comprehend them not as being relatable, but as a natural conclusion of what she is thinking and feeling and has been done. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes me feel a bit dirty trying to psychoanalyze my own books. That didn't factor into when I wrote it or anything.
Right.
It's just like, let's have a feeling and write it down. But yeah, if it's, I sense the disconnect. If it's somewhere you haven't been, then we can interpret other people's experiences in an abstract fashion, and that helps us understand. It's
Right.
like, okay, I understand how someone might do this given that. But it doesn't have the same visceral oomph to it if you weren't there.
Yeah. The scene that really sticks with me is when she's in the Starbucks bathroom. And there's something to me that just like somehow it feels like the guy that's in there is the one doing something wrong. Right? Like you don't like that's a situation that feels like it should be so bizarre that you wouldn't allow it to happen because like clearly there's something wrong. And yet obviously he lets it happen. And like maybe it's just one of those things where the reader is like, I know what the moral thing to do here is. But also if I was in that situation, would I do the moral thing too? Because he like waits till the end and he's like, are you okay? And just something I think that instances like that in the book are kind of what sticks with me, is that like and maybe this is kind of like what the book is about, like your actions impact other people, even if even if it's a non-action, right? Like if the guy in the Starbucks bathroom had immediately been like, no, hold on, what are you doing? Like, don't do that. Like, are you okay? Do you need help? Do I need to call somebody? Is there somebody, like, is there anything I can do for you? Then, maybe she wouldn't have gone on to like kill people. But like, maybe. It also feels unfair to be like, and that guy's the reason why Sam is dead. But like, you can see, because I'm a fourth dimensional being outside of the realm of the book, I can see how things escalate.
Yeah. And that just makes me think that you have a more optimistic vision for human nature than I do.
I don't know. Maybe it's more of a maybe it's not deterministic.
Yeah, I think I wrote that guy in a way that makes sense.
Yeah,
that some people might behave.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a group of guys and you presented that situation, I feel like 9 out of 10 people would be like, awesome. That saves me from doing a whole lot of work to get a result that I try to get all the time anyway. So yeah, I don't know. I just I've talked about it before that I'm a fan of Max Stirner's work, and this idea that like you should be selfish, but being selfish means creating a world that is very good for you to live in, which usually includes like making sure that everybody else has a very nice world to live in too, because then you don't run up against a whole lot of friction. And so like, I mean, I remember when I was like a sullen teenager being like, oh, love is selfish because you just tell somebody things that are nice to hear so that they are happy. And that's like, ugh. But also like, now that I'm 30, like, yeah, no, you know what? Telling people nice things is actually just a nice thing to do. And like, saying the thing is nice, and then seeing their reaction, if it's a positive one, is nice too. And like that, you can't, I have a hard time like looking down at that so long as it's not like super manipulative to like, I don't know, more nefarious ends. And so that's like a thing that's in my mind too, right? Like, I distinguish those sort of ideas by using selfishness versus self-interest, right? The selfish thing to do is just to be in the bathroom and let the lady do what she wants to do. And the self-interest thing is to make sure that this person is being safe. Because, I mean, even from like a physical, you don't know what this lady is on or has in her body or anything like that. Like, you're allowing yourself a very dangerous thing to have happen, even though, you know, internet pornography has taught you that this is actually just nothing different than hitting 777s on a slot machine.
I think you're going harder into this man's psychology than anyone ever has before.
Maybe. That's, I don't know. It's the thing that like stuck with me the most about the book. And I think that might just be, again, kind of largely because I didn't want to just read the book and be disgusted at this woman. Because, like, obviously things have gone wrong before the book to create the conditions necessary for this woman to run amok.
Yeah, and there's a very particular sense in which we have to understand that the people who are doing the terrible things are often the people who were hurt. We try to make this divide, you know, the innocent perfect victim and, you know, the perpetrator who for unknown reasons has just gone and run amok. But in actual experience, those are the same people, which is, you know, a big reason why you might get involved with the people who hurt you, because they are sympathetic, understandable creatures with, you know, very understandable experiences that we all relate to. And by being empathetic to people, you can put yourself in a vulnerable position. And that's just a terrible fact.
Yeah.
That we have to contend with. So yeah, you're not necessarily supposed to condone her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be hard to. It would be hard to seriously, right? But up until a certain point in the book, you're like, oh, okay, there's friction here. So let's move on then to Bedlam, because there's a lot of different stories here. I kind of want to ask a more workshop type question. And how did you decide the order for the stories?
Yeah, that was very accidental. So how this book happened was Ben DeVos posted on Twitter one day. He was looking for pitches for books. And I started looking around for what I had. And I'm like, you know, I bet I have enough short stories in this folder that I could make a book out of that. And I could, you know, go publish with Apocalypse Party. And wouldn't that be great? So I picked 5 of my favorite ones, which were the most recent, I think. And I sent them to him to see if they were, you know, good. And he's like, yeah, great. Send me more. So I picked the rest of them that I felt suitable for the collection. And I sent those. And when he put them together in an order, it was just the order in which I sent them. Like, it's the order they showed up in the email, in the first email and the second email. But reading it through, it seems like a lot of later themes call back in the earlier ones, and there are some elements of connection to it. And that I attribute just to the fact that they all stem from the same consciousness. And I do return to the same themes over time because, you know, humans work like that. The past invades the present. And here we are again, doing the same things, working on the same themes, and writing the same story over and over.
Sure. Why do you think that those are the themes that you work with the most?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. How we come up with a story idea. Like, a story idea is something very different in like a genre where it is far divorced from our actual experience, where it's like, let's come up with a crazy concept and write it out, right? That's more probably a story idea. But if it's something that, you know, like stems from your consciousness, it's based on your past experience, it's something you've been thinking through, then the question becomes, why are you focusing on that? Right? Because there's a question of, you know, in philosophy, I think it's the relevance theoretic. Like, why are you focusing on this thing as opposed to any of the other things that you could be focusing on? Why is the fact that this comes up over and over again? What does that indicate about it? And I don't know. I don't know. These are the things that occur to me, and when they occur to me, they have to come out. So, you know, I'll get an idea and it'll sediment and circulate, you know, sometimes a couple of days, maybe a week, and then it's like it's got to go, and I just type it out.
Good. I like that. I think that's a good way to go about doing it. You know, there's so many good ways to go about writing good books and good stories and good poems. And that's certainly as good as any.
Except for, interestingly, the one you mentioned, Split Dick David.
Oh, okay.
Because that I wrote in response to a prompt. Well, I say it's a prompt, but I had a buddy who's like, you know, we should, you know, she thought that we should collaborate and, you know, write something really horrific. And it's like, what's the most horrific thing you can do to a man? And it's like, cut up their genitals. And so she put a lot of research into how it could possibly be done. But my immediate thought was going back to some body modification stuff that I had learned back in the day. I used to work at a tattoo shop and hang around with some freaky people. So I'm like, I know how we're going to do this. And then I wrote down that story just in response to this collaboration, which was one of those things that just fell apart over time. And then I had this story and it didn't fit anywhere. It ended up in the book.
Yeah. I loved the sort of logic stuff that was going on. And, you know, as I've made clear, like, logical philosophy stuff is not my forte, but I used to work at I used to work in person at a public radio station that would receive lots of books for free from publishers, and so I picked up like some entry level, like consumer grade logic for everybody sort of book. And so that's about all I got. I got axioms and I got, you know, following threads and things like that. I've already lost a lot of the vocabulary, but I like that the whole, like, I'm going to turn around your logic onto you, and like show you how the logic doesn't work. That was fun, like from a sort of philosophical point of view. And then it's also just, I don't know, the title makes it more lighthearted than the subject matter is, so it was more like a sort of Quentin Tarantino-esque situation than like a Darren Aronofsky-esque situation.
Yes, don't you know, I'm very funny.
Yeah. I was also quite impacted by rape lines because of, I thought the writing was just great. It's, I don't know if I have the words to sort of describe me. She's not really dissociating. I guess maybe she is. But just like all this other sort of thought processes that she's going through to to keep her mind occupied. It kind of reminds me, were you around during like the alt-lit type of stuff that was going on in the, I guess, 2014, 2015? Were you at all paying attention to indie lit?
I only know about the echoes. I came into it about 2019.
Okay.
So there are still people hanging around then, names float around,
right.
But I wasn't there for it. No.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. I'll just give you a little bit more context. There is a writer who published a book through New York Tyrant called... what was her name? Hold on. I know the name of the book. What Purpose Did I Serve in Your Life? Marie Calloway. That was her name. And she was... the book was really divisive, and I haven't read all of it. I read various parts of it that were published in other places. But she was a sex worker, and as I was digging through her Tumblr, because I was fascinated by how upset people were about her writing, she said something like, I wish I could just check my Facebook while I was working, and that we didn't have to pretend that I cared about what was going on. And so it reminded me of that, but obviously in a much more dire type of situation. But there's this thing about your writing that is sort of iterative, I guess. Like in the Hexus description that shows up on your link tree, that just the word relentless comes over and over, and we're exploring the word relent and unrelenting, and I don't know. I like that. I don't have a question attached to that. I just kind of like that sort of spiraling forwardness of not only wordplay, but kind of how the thought process of the stories goes too.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would call that an example of, subjecting the word to rigorous analysis to determine, what it means and how it affects things. But yeah, there is this iterative. I didn't tell you to read Hexus, but it's an iterative book. There's a guy who kills a man, and she kills the same man over and over again, 10 times. It's the same story, just repeated. Mm-hmm. There are definitely iterations, and I've gone off on this a couple of times, this idea of iterations. So if we're gonna take this back to the very beginning, I would call it a reflection of Plato. So there's a part of Plato where he compares time to eternity, and it's in the Timaeus, where he says that the closest we can get to eternity as temporal beings is through repetition, and he's talking about the orbits of the planets. And this occurred to me specifically through human experience when I was reading Maggie Siebert's book, Bonding.
Oh, yeah.
That's a story in there, every day for the rest of your life, where the same thought occurs every day for the rest of your life. And that's what made it explicit for me that, sometimes these invasive thoughts can, this is the closest thing to permanence we may have. But at the same time, when it's a passive repetition, it feels like something you're subjected to rather than, an imitation of the
right
eternal divine.
Which paints the eternal in a less than favorable light, I suppose, if you're going to put it that way. I mean,
have you heard of the negative eternity? What's your reading on Chorin?
On what?
Emil Chorin.
Oh, I haven't made it to that one either.
Yeah, he's got a concept of the negative eternity that haunts me.
Is it that same sort of idea that stuckness of forever?
Yeah, it's like on the opposite side of temporality, we've got the one eternity that's like pure activity and the divine, and it's up there and it's doing stuff. And then on the negative side of temporality, we've got time frozen, time stops. It's just motion ceases, and that's it. It's not purified of temporality. It's just temporality that's over.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun. I don't have a good response to that. It doesn't sound like a good time. I don't think I'd like to do that. And
It sounds like a literal hell to me. Yep.
yeah,
Mhm.
I suppose that's how we get there. And let's move on to letters to Jenny just after she died. That was the first thing of yours that I read. While I could not sleep one night. I think like the night you sent me that and Bedlam, I could not sleep. So I read that while I could not sleep, and it was also very good.
Thank you.
But I don't know how, if I have anything specific to say to it to like get into the conversation. I think I remember highlighting it something. So let's go there and see what I have. Because if I highlighted it, it must have been good. Unless I highlighted something at Bedlam, and that's what reading at 3 a.m. does to you. Oh, perhaps I'm wrong, or it like left out of my phone. So it's a, I don't know. Is it a chat book? Is it a zine? Filthy Loot has it in the zines category. It was, I guess, limited run. I think this is another one of those books that Mike Klein brought up to me.
Limited run.
Being impressed by the limited run. But it is a set of letters to a roommate after her death. Or no, not roommate. It was a neighbor, right? Yes, because she's talking about the new neighbor who has moved in. I think this is another good example of that sort of like iterativeness, and dealing with the grief that comes from the death of somebody close to you. But how did you come to write this one?
Yeah, I started, and I borrowed a lot from a range of experiences for that one, which was fun, because in the letter format you can kind of hop around.
Mm-hmm.
And I took great joy in leaving out a lot of details, because you can do that too, right? If you're writing a letter to somebody, you can rely on their body of knowledge to supplement what you're actually saying to them. So, and just let them make the inferences. And what's interesting is if you write in that format, there's nobody actually there to do that. So the reader just has to make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was fun. So I wrote, it was actually about double the size. When I wrote it, and then I cut. I just made huge cuts based on what seemed a little too close to reality. And that's how we ended up. Now, I wasn't quite done with it when it was Ira Rat who posted again on Twitter that he was starting this a chapbook series. I don't know if there's a technical difference between a zine and a chapbook. It's just...
I'm not the person to ask about that.
Oh. I was
But
hoping you could settle this for me. It's just a book with staples in it. That's all.
yeah.
And his idea was they were going to be 20 pages and limited runs, and it's part of the Talented Perverts series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, limited run. There's going to be a few copies that he's got held back.
Oh,
because
good.
he wants to make a bundle, a Talented Perverts bundle, once the third one comes out. And we'll have t-shirts and swag, I guess. And it's going to be good. I'm excited about the third one. I haven't read it, but I know who's doing it, and it's exciting.
Ooh, I like that. As you were talking about writing in the letter format, I wonder if there is if that's kind of part of why there's a group of people who like reading writers' correspondences so much. Because like people really like reading Rilke's letters to a young poet. And I think like only fairly recently has an edition been put out wherein you get the young poet's letters too. And a poet I like, Stephen Jesse Bernstein, whose work is hard to find. There's a tribute website that has correspondences of his, too. And like I from one standpoint, I get like if a writer is good, you just want to accrue all of the writing you can get, which means you're going to get stuff that wasn't meant to be published because there's only a finite amount of stuff that has been published. But yeah, I wonder if there's just an element of like parasocial relationship going on there with reading Rilke's letters or whoever else's.
I get that. And I went through that with a couple of writers for sure. And it's like you just want to know like everything about them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it's just, aiming towards omniscience. It's like I don't want any part of them to be hidden from me. I want to take them as a person and absorb them entirely, which isn't fair to actual people. But if they're dead, it's less offensive. So yeah, I want to know everything they said to everyone and all of their secrets and all of the thoughts that they hid in the letters too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's voyeuristic.
For sure. Yeah, I wonder if we're going to be able to do that in the post-internet age. Like, I feel like I've seen a million joke tweets, like DMs to a young poet or whatever. And it does feel like it would be difficult to, like, gather up. If some, minor internet writer celebrity were to die tomorrow, it would be tough to gather up all of like their Discord messages and create something out of that. So I wonder if that's even like an art form that is just going to become fairly untenable, or if we're going to have to find some other means of keeping people alive.
Totally. It makes me think that most of my interactions, thoughts, and work are utterly disposable and will just disappear. Which is, contributes to a sense of futility, but also a nice bit of freedom.
Yeah. The first, I grew up Catholic, and I feel like maybe it makes sense that the first kind of religious exploration I did beyond that was into Buddhism, and particularly Soto Zen Buddhism, and this idea that like everything is nothingness, nothing matters, and doesn't that grant you such awesome liberation, right? Like at some point it's all going to be gone, so that makes it really easy to just you know, be kind and gentle and empathetic and compassionate, because you're not worried about holding things too much.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if not everything were permanent?
Yeah.
I don't have to be committed to a past self or past actions or past thoughts. I can, carry on unburdened.
Yeah. The talented perverts thing. So I guess it's interesting that you had something that you felt fit with the mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
And that I agree fits with the mission statement. I particularly enjoy the sentence on the website, work that is hauntological but not horrific. I feel like I have a bad definition of hauntological. I first came across it through music. There's a website called Every Noise at Once that has it's made by a person who I think works at Spotify, who just made an algorithm to split everything up into a bunch of different music genres and then map them out visually from like atmospheric to dense and like electronic to organic in instrumentation and sound. And hauntological is just one of the like weird people will argue about whether or not that's actually a genre. And so I like Googled about it and came across some music blog from the early aughts that was talking about how hauntological is. And he was talking about it musically too. Like it wasn't until 2 years ago that I learned that this was like a philosophical, social term that people were using. But he was like, it's looking at how people from the past looked at the future, which informed how I listened to the music. But I don't know if that's like how normal people use the term.
I don't know if normal people do use the term. I don't know if I even noticed the term when I went there. I was focused on, it was aesthetic. This is aesthetic fiction. And yeah, I wasn't done the book at the time, but I just messaged Ira and I'm like, I have something for you. And he's like, great, I just bought your book. And I'm like, it's not done. See you soon. But yeah, I was focused on aesthetic fiction. I felt like, that feels right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not necessarily horrific. It's not necessarily literary. It's aesthetic. It's got that etymology. I do know that it's perceptual, but it's not the way we use it now has developed.
Okay. But because I'm not even sure what people mean when they use it now. And maybe that's just a me thing. Like, do you think you have a grasp upon it?
I mean, we use it in many ways. Some people just means it's like art. It's just arty.
Mm-hmm.
Or my gender hears it more often with respect to cosmetics. It's like the aesthetics of something. I relate it to the form of beauty. Right? This is one of the highest forms that has to do with the best things that we can perceive. Right? So perception, but idealized. But, sometimes I think we just use it because it sounds fancy.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if we don't use a lot of words that way.
I think we do. Maybe has vibes.
Yeah.
Go with vibes.
Cool. Okay, so we're at an hour. What would you like as a parting idea? What do you want our listeners to walk away with as we come to a close here?
I want our listeners to read and be hurt by my work and not necessarily relate to it. But if that's nice, that's nice. So this is the first section of a story from Bedlam called Counterexample, The Jogger. And I was riffing on this idea that, so there's a woman, she has recently had her life upset. Shocker. I know. But she sees a jogger on the side of the road, and her immediate thought, of course, is not to run them down. But then she starts to wonder how many good decisions has she ever actually made in her life, and whether her first instinct isn't always correct. And that leads to some rumination and a fatal decision. So let's get into it. I saw the jogger on the side of the road because of her reflective shoes and headband. Her ponytail bounced with her movement, arms bent at the elbow, pushing forward at a pace and with a strain that I knew meant she was nearing the end of her run. And I thought of how many points she'd be. It's a game we used to play driving with friends in high school, pointing out obstacles on the road ahead. How many points for the pedestrian? How many points for the stroller? How many points if you could get them both in one go? We probably based it on video games, but we didn't play them, so I don't know. The points were randomly assigned, and sometimes there were bonuses for difficulty. Ultimately, the game served to point out the things up ahead that a new driver shouldn't hit and ensure that the driver did see them, which is probably why my first instinct when I saw the jogger was to avoid her, not to kill her and claim the points. But what if my first instinct is wrong? What if I've been following my own impetus to a worse end all this time? It was a question I had to ask driving down a dirt road after midnight in a rental car with the sum totality of my belongings. I'd spent all day with my ex sorting through them, determining what would merit a spot in the car and what wouldn't, what would go to the side of the road instead, what he could sell to cover my half of the rent until someone else moved in. Surely the things at the bottom of the car were decided on more generously. Later, I'd find things down there that shouldn't have come with me, but they did, because at the beginning of the process, when the car was only full of potential, I'd decided to keep things that weren't worth it, weren't worth the volume they exist in. When tomorrow I'd unpack this little Corolla, I'd find a box of VHS tapes at the bottom that were useless without the player. Well, I'd had to leave behind my winter clothes, or most of them. Some scattered sweaters packed between the items that had already earned their place. I thought of how cold winter would be on my legs and how the Marilyn Monroe diamond collection wouldn't help me then. What if my first thought is always wrong? What if it's actually harmful? When he asked me to move in, I said I'd think about it, and that was the end in disguise. But I didn't want to think about it. I wanted not to lose my power when I said yes. I wanted to live on with him in the way we had become accustomed, without this gravitational change taking place where I'd agreed to something without resistance, without making suffer through it for it, without the diminishing sense of entitlement one gets when one's demands aren't immediately agreed to. I thought about the future and how it wouldn't hold the mystery I used to make him think that maybe he hadn't earned me yet, hadn't earned his place yet, and how I might not be something he could have. I wish I knew how to love someone without giving that up, or more precisely, I wish that giving it up wouldn't mean he'd cease to love me as he should. I thought of him, annoyed, awakened by the sound of me defrosting the bathroom pipe with the hairdryer, the mundanity of it, the disdain I had to look forward to. And because I didn't want it, I made him think I didn't love him. With the jogger long gone in my rear view, I knew that if I wanted to make the other decision, I'd have to turn around, and that we shouldn't take that opportunity for granted. Some decisions cannot be undone. I thought of all the time I'd have to unpack the car in my new room tomorrow. One town over where I'd live my new life, how after hiding all the crying I'd been doing these few months, tomorrow there'd be no one there to see it. If I could live through one more day with him, I'd do it. One of the good days from before, when we didn't know what was coming. Why is it that I have to live through all these days? Maybe I do, but she doesn't. I had made the wrong decision, and this time I would correct it.